There's no paintings of Elizabeth in this one. My presentation today will discuss findings resulting from current research investigating the materials and techniques of Hans Holbein the Younger's portrait drawings. The main focus has been the function of the drawings, explored through Holbein's use and choice of materials. These drawings were fundamental stepping stones for the final painting, so their worth and importance in terms of understanding a Tudor artist's technique is significant. Whether used directly or indirectly, the relationship of the drawings to the paintings of the same sitter, and consequently their function, is a complex one. Whilst these drawings are by no means neglected, their materials and techniques have never undergone the same scientific and visual scrutiny as Holbein's oil paintings. Consequently, technical information has been limited, approximated, inaccurate, or unknown. This lack of a thorough visual and technical examination has, in some cases, resulted in a misinterpretation of the materials and techniques of Holbein's portrait drawings. A comprehensive description of them has therefore not always been fully realised. Addressing these shortcomings, this research has started to characterise Holbein's media and methods and to explore what information is held in the drawings that may inform the method of transfer to oil or miniature. Together, these aspects are building a more accurate picture of Holbein's choice and use of materials, and consequently a better understanding of how the drawings were used. Working within the central question, why do the drawings look the way they do, such characterisation of materials and techniques, as well as taking into account condition and signs of use, further enables links to be made between the appearance of the drawings and their probable function. This research has questioned how we interpret the appearance of Holbein's portrait drawings and was triggered by an issue of attribution relating to a portrait drawing acquired by the V&A in 1869. Was it or was it not a Holbein portrait drawing? An issue that had been raised on multiple occasions since its acquisition, and a question that demanded an understanding of Holbein's drawing processes. An investigation of the drawing's materials and techniques was carried out in the hope that comparison with known Holbein drawings would lead to some kind of conclusion as to its authenticity. There were many debates regarding what were considered Holbein-esque characteristics, as well as apparent stylistic anomalies. In relation to attribution, we often talk in terms of the authorship of drawings, and this particular investigation led me to question how in turn we read a drawing. In other words, why does a drawing look the way it does, and how can we interpret and describe what we see in order to make it better understood? Taking into account its condition, how may the materials, their method of application, as well as any signs of use, relate to such a drawing's function? In turn, if there is also a painting of the same sitter, what is the drawing's relationship to that painting or miniature? Key to answering these questions was reinstating the drawings as the primary source material for investigation. This may seem like stating the obvious, but the lack of a detailed, systematic investigation of the drawings had resulted in misinterpretations, inaccuracies, or limitations regarding the drawings' descriptions. For example, this research looks to differentiate between marks made as part of the drawing process and marks made which indicate it was used for transfer, factors which have often been misread or overlooked and consequently incorrectly described. To this end, developing the visual analysis became central to the research. During a lecture in 1996, British Museum curator Anthony Griffiths spoke about the archaeology of the print. Interpreting this archaeological analogy for my own approach to the drawings, I viewed the drawings in terms of layers from the paper upwards. Such an approach incorporates the size of paper, its tone, texture, weight, and watermarks, and more importantly, the media and the sequence of its laying down, as well as the method of application. Visual analysis has been comprehensive, involving examination with the naked eye and by microscope, using different light sources and directions of light, such as natural, raking, and transmitted. Raman spectroscopy, used for non-destructive and non-invasive pigment analysis, has been carried out on a number of Holbein portrait drawings and miniatures at Windsor, some results of which will be illustrated here. More recently, infrared reflectography has been utilised to confirm, or not as the case may be, the presence of silver point and where it may have been used, but this aspect is complicated and not yet fully resolved. My main focus have been the drawings that relate to currently attributed paintings and a miniature of the same sitter. However, I have examined over 90 Holbein portrait drawings and made comparisons with those of his contemporaries in order to gain an overview of his materials and techniques and to recognise signs of use. Studying the drawings as a group has highlighted similarities, differences, and potentially established patterns of production and use. Concentrating on the 18 has naturally been most useful in terms of understanding their relationship to the painting or the miniature. In terms of appearance, the immediate differences may appear somewhat obvious. For instance, the tones of the paper resulting from the use of a coloured preparation, the introduction of a more descriptive use of coloured media in chalks, or the emphasis on contour. What is not so obvious and harder to convey in reproduction is the often significant difference in the sizes of the drawings, as well as condition, and the different levels of finish in terms of media. Today, I would like to focus on 4 aspects of Holbein's portrait drawings that have been revealed or more fully understood using this archaeological approach, alongside comprehensive visual and some instrumental analysis. So it's the rendering of flesh tones, the similarities in drawing and painting, media of contours and signs of transfer. The colour and nature of the substrate naturally has an impact on the use and look of the media on its surface. Holbein's portrait drawings are executed on prepared and unprepared papers, and the nature and application of the flesh tones on these papers can differ. This early portrait of Jacob Meyer from 1516 is one of a pendant pair that, together with his wife Dorothea, relates to a double portrait of the couple. This early drawing is an important starting point, not just in terms of its date, but because it has already established some fundamentals of Holbein's drawing style and technique. For example, the concentration of detail on the face of the sitter, a more cursory, sketchy style of the costume, a feature that is consistent throughout his portrait drawings, whatever media he chooses. On a purely practical front, the key was to capture a likeness during a sitting, rather than concentrate on a costume that could be modelled during the painting process. The paper here is covered with a now discoloured grey preparation. In this instance, the prepared paper fulfills its traditional function, acting as the appropriate substrate on which to draw with a silver metal point. For this drawing, the prepared paper plays little or no part in terms of a mid-tone on which to base the sitter's flesh tones. Instead, Jacob's skin colour is suggested through strokes of red chalk with little or no blending and additional shading in silver point. The rather crimson red chalk is used to give some sense of modelling and shading to the face and is concentrated around the eyes, the mouth, cheeks, chin and tip of nose. The red chalk overlaps some of the contours and by implication was added after the likeness had been captured in silver point. The depiction of the flesh tone is limited to his face, omitting his neck. Further, it is not as descriptive or as sophisticated as will be found in his later drawings and bears little relation to the flesh tone of the painting. William Warham, Thomas More, Henry and Mary Guilford are examples of drawings that were executed on unprepared papers during Holbein's first stay in England from 1526 to 1528. Holbein's portraits of the Meyer family for the Darmstadt Madonna painting are also on unprepared papers, but Jacob and Anna Meyer have a pale green wash background painted in and around their figures. These 3 drawings, plus the 4 you've just seen, differ from the previous 1516 metal point drawing in rendering of the flesh tones. Flesh tones on these drawings have to be built upon a creamy white paper substrate. In most cases, they were created by stumping and blending of different tones of red chalk with the addition of brown, black, and sometimes yellow. Such use of coloured chalks enabled a more descriptive approach to the flesh tones and to Holbein's portrait drawing in general. William Warham's flesh tone is an example where it appears to be applied as a wash. Under magnification, the coloration is more embedded in the paper fibres, and the presence of vermilion particles would seem to imply that it was applied aqueously. This base was then modelled with different coloured chalks, as all the flesh tones appeared to be blocked in after the contours are set in place. The pink prepared papers introduced during Holbein's second and final stay in England from 1532 to 43 served more than one purpose. Taking into account painted portraits for which no drawings survive, it has been calculated that Holbein portrayed well over a fifth of the English peerage. Such production, especially during his second stay, was surely a significant factor in relation to Holbein's choice of materials and techniques. The pink preparation covered the entire surface of the paper. No doubt it would have taken some time to prepare these papers, but using such a base for portrait drawing would have been ultimately time-saving, giving a mid-tone and therefore providing a ready-made flesh pink foundation on which to personalise and model the features. Traditionally, such a surface would enable the use of a choice of metal points, but I would argue that although this was an option, the prime reason for such a prepared paper was that of a ready-made mid-tone. Holbein's use, or not, as the case may be, of metal point will be taken up in more detail in the section on the media on contours. The pink prepared papers range quite dramatically in tone, and from a pale pink to a deep salmon. One can make connections with Holbein's use of a pink preparation to the grounds on panels of some of his portrait paintings. There is also a link to the pink carnations used for the art of miniature painting. Although writing in the later period, it is interesting to read that Norgate made comment that the miniaturists Hilliard and Oliver made up batches of carnation applied to vellum and would use the most appropriate for their sitters. This could have been Holbein's practice also, given the wide range of pinks existing amongst these drawings. Richard Southall and Jane Seymour are examples of Holbein's use of pink prepared paper covering the entire sheet. They illustrate the difference in the makeup of the batches of the preparation, depending on ratios of materials as well as how it is applied. Raman analysis of 18 Windsor's drawings confirmed Holbein's use of vermilion and calcium carbonate in the composition of these preparations. In the case of Southall, the pink preparation has obvious brushstroke streaks seen in its application, and is a thinner, more watery tint than the more opaque examples. Whilst chalks have been used to individualise skin tone, it is interesting to note that rather than use a yellow chalk, Holbein makes a note on this drawing to make Southall's eyes a little yellowish. The difference is highlighted in comparison with Jane Seymour's pink prepared paper. Here it is more evenly applied, appears thicker and also to have more body to it. Coloured chalks are used again to model and further individualise the sitter's flesh tones. Abrasion can naturally play a part in changes, so it's difficult to say how relative the skin tone is to the final paintings. But there are definite relationships in terms of use and reference to the drawing whilst painting in the absence of the sitter, such as the use and positioning of highlights. As I mentioned earlier, the relationship of drawing to painting is a complex one. Demonstrating to the client his immense skill, Holbein's drawings captured the likeness of the sitter. If the commission was taken up, the drawings could be used as a cartoon, with the salient features being traced over to transfer the image to the panel or via an intermediary sheet, as Rachel's explained, or as in the case of Thomas More, pricked for pouncing. However, the drawings could also be used during the painting process as visual reference in the absence of the sitter. In his Schilder book of 1604, Van Mander mentions that the sequential way that Holbein produced his paintings distinguished him from his contemporaries, commenting that, as for example where a beard or hair had to be shown overlying, he first painted the whole as it should be, carefully taking the shadows into account, and when it had dried he painted the beard or hair very flowingly and naturally over the top of it. This observation is astute with regards to Holbein's painting technique. Moreover, on visual examination, such sequencing is seen in the rendering of hair on many of his preparatory portrait drawings. For example, the drawing of Charles de Solier illustrates this particular layering of different coloured media to achieve the facial hair. It is this very aspect, that of the laying of his materials, which has been overlooked in his drawing technique, but which has revealed much about his drawing processes. Layering of the media not only builds up the three-dimensionality of the portrait, but also serves to hide potential workings and fixes the salient lines. This drawing, which is in exceptional condition, could be said to be very painterly in terms of Holbein's descriptive use of colour and finish. The skin-like quality of chalk on the paper texture is exploited to its full potential. The drawing shows similarities with the finished painting, not just in terms of likeness, but also in what is translated from one to the other. The amount of attention to detail in this drawing is important, since much of it has been translated into the painting, as seen in the highlighting of the nose and grey eyelashes. Given an absence of a sitter whilst painting, such factors would seem to indicate that the drawing was a close reference tool. Whilst there are no physical signs of transfer on this drawing, it does not mean that it did not play a part in the transfer process. Any facial underdrawing is very hard to decipher with this painting, so to be able to draw conclusions regarding transfer is problematic. The painted head is slightly larger than the drawn one. Whilst we could speculate that it was not used directly, it does make us question the levels of use of the drawing and what was translated during the painting process. Contouring defined the sitter's features and played a pivotal role in terms of transfer to panel, and as such is reflected in the underdrawings and paintings themselves. Contours are strokes that define shape and are prominent in Holbein's portrait drawings. The media function and even the authorship of these contours has been much debated. The uncertainty in the literature relating to these contours is due in part to a lack of definition or clarification of what exactly is being described. This is a result of how hard it is to decipher, as I've discovered, what one is actually looking at. This ambiguity comes not only in terms of the media of those contours, but also with relation to marks made as part of the drawing process, as opposed to those made as a result of transfer. This research has begun to characterise the media of the contours and to recognise how they may be affected by the act of transfer in order to more accurately interpret why they look the way they do. Holbein's drawings are often talked about in terms of his precision and economy of line. They have also been described as flat and mechanical, which has led some to consider that he may have used a drawing machine. Condition again plays a significant part in this interpretation. However, when really scrutinised, there is evidence of Holbein searching for the contour during the sitting, resulting in multiple lines, and this would seem to contradict these linear and mechanical descriptions. Such whispers of working can just be seen around the contours of this detail of Anna Meyer. Contours in Holbein's portrait drawings are often composed of more than one type of media, making them quite complex and difficult to unravel. From 1532, the addition of black ink or watercolour over the dry media of the contour was quite commonplace in Holbein's drawings. Paul Gantz thought that the drawings were originally drawn in chalk only, and that these inked contours were a result of restoration. Having looked closely at these drawings, however, I would argue that the functions of such reinforcements, whether aqueous or reinforced with the same media, were threefold. 1, they would fix and give more permanence to a fragile chalk line. 2, whilst they may not have been added during the sitting, they could conceal any uncertainties or corrections made during that sitting. And 3, they seem to sit within an artistic tradition. Such so-called reinforcements are seen in Holbein's early portrait drawings of the Meyers. Here, black chalk additions are added sporadically along some metal point lines. Moreover, reinforcements, adjustments, or general playing around with the drawings is also found on the portrait drawings from the workshop of Hans Holbein the Elder. To date, I can only confirm one instance of the use of silver point as a drawing tool. This is found on the drawing of Lady Ratcliffe as part of a small additional design and not part of the portrait itself. Not only does it visually and microscopically look like silver point, especially when compared to the adjacent black chalk, but its disappearance under infrared reflectography would seem to confirm that it is silver point. Whilst contours were made up of friable and aqueous media, I have yet to locate categorically a distinct use of metal point as a drawing implement for the contours of the portraits on pink prepared papers. The emphasis on the descriptive of these portraits required the use of coloured chalks, and therefore perhaps less reason to draw from the life in metal point. Metal point is more limiting in terms of what it can offer in tone, texture, and variation of line. If mistakes were made, it would also be harder to remove from a more friable media. Red chalk, for instance, would be easily blended and lost within its pink background if an error occurred. Some costume contours are harder to decipher in terms of media, but in the main, findings would seem to indicate that metal point was not the main drawing tool of choice. However, further instrumental analysis and reconstruction may help to clarify this. When interpreting what media was used, it is important to remember that coloured substrates can affect our judgment. It has long been assumed that the necklace worn by Lady Audley shows extensive use of metal point, but under close examination it does not appear to be the case. The lines do not have the uniformity of a metal point drawn line. Instead, They display characteristics of chalk in the variation of thickness of line and its particulate nature. Holbein was incredibly adept at using chalks to different effects. Lines could be thick and textured to cover a bigger surface area. On the other hand, such lines could be fine and precise, almost pen-like with precision and crispness. So far, the accumulating weight of evidence points to carbon of some kind. The necklace media does not display signs of oxidation often associated with silver point, nor does it appear to be lead point under magnification. Whilst I'm aware that lead point is visible in infrared, the infrared carried out seems to further confirm that this is not a silver point drawing, since it remains visible. Moreover, Raman analysis of these areas showed a strong carbon signal. What is not in doubt is the fact that the contour's appearance have been affected by the tracing tool, whether a metal stylus or not, and therefore often misinterpreted, which brings me to the final section. Contours followed have been shown to relate to underdrawings and therefore have highlighted one important function of some of the drawings, that of a face pattern. Where there is a predominant use of chalk, contours can be subtle while still apparent, as in the case of William Warham, seen here on the left, or more emphatic, as in the case of the drawing of Simon George on the right, where black aqueous media is a prominent material. The exaggerated emphasis of contours in some cases is not always originally intentional, but is a consequence of tracing for transfer or abrasion of surrounding areas, further accentuating the black media, seen here with Lady Margaret Butts, for example. Warham, Simon George and Lady Butts all show varying degrees of signs of transfer in the form of indentations on or near the drawn contours. Examination with infrared does not offer definitive evidence of having any metal point as part of the actual drawing process or tracing process. However, use of a metal point as a tracing tool that has subsequently made a mark is harder to confirm. If metal point was a tool for tracing, the fact that it may have followed carbon media has rendered the use of infrared to confirm silver point presence problematic and so far inconclusive. To be able to dismiss lead point would mean using another means of analysis such as X-ray fluorescence. These waking light details of William Warham show evidence of the use of a tool that leaves blind indentations where it does not always follow the line perfectly. In areas where it does encroach on a contour or part of the drawing, the tool presses into the media and the resulting indent acts as a trough. When extraneous chalk is abraded, this can unintentionally exaggerate the contour or make it look like a mark made as part of the drawing process, as seen in image A. Whilst the material of the tool is unknown, it was such that it left no secondary potentially disfiguring drawn mark. This is confirmed by some of the indentations remaining blind, as seen in image B. Although it does not make sense to use a metal point that would potentially mark a drawing to trace over the contours, especially those with a pink preparation, it has not yet been ruled out completely. An unidentified man executed on pink prepared paper shows signs of transfer in the form of indentations. Some of the contours have been described as a consequence of reinforcement by very sharp black chalk lines at the ear, collar outlines, and here and there in the hat, hair, and clothing. However, visual evidence I have gathered indicated these are created by the act of tracing with a thin tool, which has pushed the media of the contours into the fine and even shape that remains, as well as acting as a trough for friable media. Such a process has exaggerated the contour. These indentations that encroach on black media further emphasize the line. They also create a uniform line that may resemble that of a metal point. Again, recent Raman analysis has confirmed carbon media in the troughs of these lines. To conclude, these portrait drawings, seemingly simple, are really quite complex in their construction and subsequent signs of use. Reinstating the drawing as a primary source of information has been fundamental to this research. Although there are still some issues to clarify, investigating the media and its application in terms of layers laid down in a drawing sequence has resulted in some progress towards a better understanding of Holbein's drawing processes. It has begun to distinguish between marks made as part of the drawing process and those made as part of a transfer process. It has also begun to make connections with the finished oil or miniature through exploration of what information is transferred from one to the other. Establishing what the materials and techniques are provides a more accurate terminology with which to describe such drawings. Condition plays a vital role in the current appearance of a drawing and should be taken into account in our interpretation. Assessing similarities and differences, establishing patterns, and evidencing signs of use of the drawings have together provided more information regarding how their form relates to their function. By effectively reading a drawing, we can better understand its function and method of production. Thank you.